I would like to introduce our moderator for this session. Her name is Megan Brown. She is a partner with Wiley Ryan. Megan.
Great, thank you. So thanks for being with us today. John Marino sends his regrets. He would have been here, but couldn't. But we'll step in and proceed with our wonderful cyber government regulation new paradigm panel. I am delighted to have this many government regulators here, or non-regulators, government experts here, because each of their agencies touches cyber and mobility in a different way, and I think we can have a nice discussion of some of the challenges the industry is facing, some of their priorities, and really have a nice cross-section of perspectives. They're doing so many things, as my clients are well aware. So I'll start with brief introductions. I won't read you their CVs because we'll be here for a while because they've all done a lot. But Nikki McGinnis, to my left, is Associate Chief of the Public Safety and Homeland Security Bureau at the FCC, the one regulatory agency here. Next, we have Matt Scholl, who's the Chief of the Computer Security Division at NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology. Then we have Glenn Reynolds, Chief of Staff at NTIA. I think many of you heard him on the previous panel. He is doing double duty today to talk cyber, so thank you, Glenn, for that. Then we have John O'Connor, who is Assistant Deputy Director at the National Cyber and Communications Integration Center, the NCIC, at the Department of Homeland Security. And last but certainly not least, Vince Sritapan, who is in Mobile Security R&D. He's the Program Manager at the Department of Homeland Security, and they do a lot of tech R&D, science stuff. So we have a great cross-section of true engineers and science people. We have some lawyers and policy folks. So with that, I thought we would kick it off. I mean, the title of the panel is The New Paradigm, Regulation versus Partnership, and I thought we would sort of ask folks to go through in no particular order if you could describe what public-private partnerships mean to you in the cyberspace, and maybe give an example of one in particular. I find that phrase, public-private partnership, can sort of be a little nebulous. It's not clear what that means, but if you guys could give some concrete examples, I think the audience can really start to understand why that's so important and why that's been the linchpin of federal cyber policy for the last 5 to 10 years. So, Nikki, why don't we start with you, since you're right to my left?
Sure. So I'm Nikki McGinnis with the FCC again, and public-private partnerships in the area of cybersecurity are fundamental to the work that we're doing at the FCC. The chairman has made it clear that he believes that the approach to cyber should be business-led, industry-led, and in doing so, we've worked very closely with industry, with other stakeholders, state, local, tribal entities, and partnering with them on tough issues with respect to cyber. In terms of a particular example, I would look at one of our federal advisory committees, the Communication Security Reliability and Interoperability Council, which is a mouthful, CSRIC. We have tasked them with a number of issues that are confronting the industry, and perhaps one of the I think most important things that they've done is they have looked at the NIST cybersecurity framework and how that can apply to the communications sector across the different types of communications sectors, whether it's broadcast or wireline, and how you would take that cyber risk management and apply it to communications. So they did do that in 2015, and they came up with a set of principles which we think are extremely useful and has really moved the ball forward. And I would say that would be a really good example for us. And there are many others, but I want to let others talk.
And just to expand on this, just to give some context to the size of that effort, the CSRIC working group was divided into these 5 industry subsegments. It was thousands of man and woman hours across the industry to have these meetings and map it. The report, I think, is what, like 300 or 400 pages?
It's so long I didn't bring it. Yeah, but it was over, I think, 100 different experts who came together across industry to help with that effort.
Great. Matt?
Sure. So I'm Matt Scholl. I'm from the National Institute of Standards and Technology. We're a small, technology-focused, non-regulatory agency under the Department of Commerce. And being small, being non-regulatory, being non-classified, being open, transparent, are all qualities that help generate and build good outputs in public-private partnerships. It takes a lot of the concern about equities and about what you're going to get when you work with the government, because we're non-regulatory, we're small, we're open, and we're non-classified. Two examples that we constantly work in, one that has been mentioned, but the S in NIST is standards, and I'm one of those weird people who will talk excitedly about standards, so don't let me do that, but I will. But one of the primary public-private partnerships in the US is the work that government and industry does together, with industry leading in both national and international standards bodies. And it's the policy as well as law in the federal government that industry, US industry, leads standards, both national and international engagements. The government goes where industry believes are the important places, and then we participate with them as another member in those standards associations. So participation in SDOs is a primary place for NIST to work in public-private partnerships. The other example that was mentioned was the cybersecurity framework, which is a different model that we did under an executive order and duress, where we were directed to do something within a time frame, working with industry, in which case then we applied those other aspects of openness, transparency, traceability, inclusivity, and then worked with our stakeholders aggressively to produce something in that model.
Glenn?
So actually, Matt just took a couple of my talking points.
I was reading your paper.
Particularly the one about, well, we're also small and non-regulatory, and at Commerce. In fact, our guys work together very closely on a lot of issues, including some of the encryption work. And I think those are actually extremely important characteristics when it comes to trying to work within a public-private partnership. As you said, Megan, that phrase PPP we throw around a lot in a lot of different contexts, and it can mean a lot of different things to different people. In this particular area of cyber, what we've been focused on is what we refer to, and this may sound a little bit redundant for those of you who are attended the last panel, is our efforts with regard to multi-stakeholder work. We have tried to convene, and particularly focused on cyber and privacy, a number of processes in which we invite all of the relevant stakeholders to participate, to come sit down, be it the industry, being it consumer representatives, being government representatives, sit down. We don't force the issue. We don't direct the issue. We act as a facilitator to help these discussions. And the idea here is that there are, particularly when it gets into the details of particular areas within cyber and within privacy, where things are changing so rapidly and so dramatically, that there's the potential for a win-win that allows for all the entities to come together and say, okay, we can agree on some certain common grounds. Right now, perhaps the market is not working, often because of a lack of communication among the various parts of the industry or the lack of information. Bring folks together, reach some common ground. Particularly, as I know, we are part of the Department of Commerce. We have a goal of emphasizing how to make industry more innovative and help facilitate the development of the technologies in this area to the extent possible. So we try to bring folks to the table and communicate and see where that leads. And so that's one of the areas we've been focused on. And as you guys may know, we've just recently started a multi-stakeholder focused on on patches for Internet of Things, which we can talk a little more specifically. But we also did one more recent before that on transparency on cyber risks. So that's where kind of how we try to deal with the private partnership.
John.
Thank you. So John O'Connor, I'm with the NCIC, National Cybersecurity Communications Integration Center. I'm also the director of the the NCC under that, National Coordinating National Communications Coordinating Center for Communications. That entity actually is one of the ones, excuse me, there's so many letters and DHS and acronyms. I got a study guide here, and I've been doing it so long, and sometimes I forget what they stand for. But part of that new paradigm they talk about here, I think, is actually just adding to the complexity of the world we're in, because we have long had a paradigm where we've shared with industry, and we've had a partnership that we've brought up to the table. The organization I have directly has 63 government and industry partners mixed in there. Some regulators, some entities within departments and agencies that have large contracts, so you can understand where they might have some interest. The different piece that we bring to the mix is a little bit more operationally focused. What's happening in the world now? What do we have to address? So over the 30 years that I've been associated with the organization, we've been working with the carriers to understand what's happening in the world and make sure that anything that we can do on the government side to provide them information, act as a broker on their behalf to make things work a little bit better. By way of example, we're taking some of the physical world responses that we have. Most recently, you had the 2 hurricanes, Hermine and then Lester. And how is that impacting the physical environment and the government's decisions in emergency response? Curfews and blockades come to mind. Well, carriers need to work past curfew. They need to get past the blockade. We become an advocate to allow that to happen with the local jurisdictions that are making those decisions. Selfishly, we use their networks. We want their networks to work in those situations. So we're taking some of what we've learned in the physical environment and we're applying it to the cyber world, because that's another threat that's come forward against that. If some of you recall the zombie announcements that was broadcast some time ago up in Michigan, that happened on the day that was going to be the State of the Union. Our NKIC Center got word of that, had some consultations with the FCC, and found out it was not just 1 or 2 broadcast stations. There were about 5 or 6 in that mix. Based on that input, we contacted the entity that manufactured the equipment. He has a manual online. That manual online has the default user ID and password mixed in it. Next line down says, and change the default user ID and password. So I don't think good guidance was enacted in that particular situation. Being it was a State of Union, there is some concern that the president will be making a speech later that day. And the emergency alert system is something that's there for him to contact and coordinate with the nation. You don't want that interrupting his State of the Union address. So we worked with the FCC. We worked with the manufacturer to identify a client list. We brought in some industrial control systems expertise that we had on the floor in US CERT. In about a couple hours, we were able to reach out to the client list that had put that equipment out in the field. We actually had scanned the internet through a tool that we use from publicly available sources to identify a few others. And we were able to get people to take some best practices information in that particular situation so that EAS was not abused further and didn't interrupt the address that happened later that evening. So that was a partnership that you can see roll through, operationally enact, and it was done in about 4 or 5 hours based on the partnership that we were able to do with the number of people on the communications side of the house.
Vince?
Great. So hello, everyone. My name is Vincent Swerdepan. I'm with the Department of Homeland Security Science and Technology Directorate. So S&T is actually the research arm for the Department of Homeland Security. That includes everything from Customs and Border Protection, FEMA, Secret Service, you name it within the DHS family, we're that research arm. So public-private partnership, what it actually means to us is quite simply cooperative and government-funded research. Right? We fund research in cyber 50 to 100 million annually every year to solve real-world problems. It's unlike you might find where HSARPA, Homeland Security ARPA, you'll find DARPA and others that do 5+ year research. We do 1 to 3 year research. So we get requirements from the components. We get it from other areas like Fed CIO Council's Mobile Technology Tiger Team, different enterprise risks and threats that might be out there, and look at how do we solve that problem. I can speak for the mobility portfolio since that's mine, but the other aspects, I mean, we have different ones that we do within the cyber realm. I mean, everything's cyber nowadays. So, but I'll say that the examples that I could give you for public-private partnership, real easy would be, our Silicon Valley office. So that's actually us within DHS who runs that, looking at, what problems do we have within the department that could be used to reach the startups, the small businesses. How can we solve different problems that way? Other ways that we leverage, it's not just Silicon Valley or small business, but it's also big business, academia, you name it. So when we look at that, we do what's called broad agency announcements, where we fund, different projects anywhere between, 10 to 20 million per project, just depends on the project. Some go even higher. But it's all about protecting the Homeland Security enterprise. So that extends to not just our needs, but also the needs that are there in the public domain. So, for the most part, ours is cooperative research, right? Greatest examples are the research that we do. If you look at any of the car forensics that's out there, a company called Burla, that was one of ours that we funded to make happen, so that if you, for example, put your Bluetooth into that car and you hooked it up, you'd be surprised. It downloads all your contact information, where you went, and phone history and all that good stuff. Well, all that can actually be pulled off the phone and also pulled off the car, right? So that's the type of innovation that we fund and research to solve real-world problems, whether it's for law enforcement, using cyber, or for just the regular enterprise, whether it's mobile and mobile app malware. You name it, that's what we do.
Great. I think the industry is starting to look ahead towards IoT, and a lot of what you guys are doing will have IoT consequences or impacts on that sort of shifting ecosystem. But before we get there, can you, and you don't all have to answer this, but we talked a little bit before this about mobile security in particular, mobile devices, the mobile ecosystem. Each of your agencies is touching that in different kinds of ways. Can you share sort of your perspective on how well things are going, or where the big issues are that you're reacting to, either in the press or as a matter of your agency's priorities for the next couple years, knowing that it's going to bleed into IoT, and sort of how you tackle mobile will have effects on the IoT ecosystem?
So that was an essay question. I think we got the word paradigm, ecosystem, IoT, and cyber all in a sentence. So we should just throw
like a set of comments
I
to
know.
DHS.
We just need to throw in cloud and we got it all. So yeah, we're looking at this in a couple of different perspectives. IoT is a little different of an animal in that it's not really like a specific thing. IoT is weird. You know it when you see it, but to define it is a little more difficult. It's really a catalog of items that generally is from a individual sensor. So rather than being IT-based, it's actually going to gather data from the physical world, and it can have a back end all the way up to clouds and then a loop back into an actuator system to some extent. But I think one of the things that is either throttling or will enable a lot of this is our pipes and connections. So we're here at Super Mobility Week and CTIA. A lot of this will have to do with 5G and connected technologies and our ability to extend broadband out to the nation so that we can have those IoT connections, both industry, different industrial sectors as well as the home. So from this perspective, we're looking at interoperability, standardization, safety and security, as well as connectivity to allow all these things to kind of come together.
Do you feel like the international standards groups are, from my perspective, what I see in here is, leave a lot of this to the international standards groups. Folks are addressing this quite actively. Do you engage with them? Are you pushing those sorts of things with them?
Yeah, so we work a lot with the standards groups in all of these individual issues, both on, we're talking, 8-bit microprocessor sensor devices and the security that's built into the hardware of them, all the way up through the individual use cases when you look at things like smart agriculture and how does that apply. And there's weird like slinky effects that go on. There's a lot of deployment in individual verticals, and markets are racing to grab verticals right now, while the standard space is then behind it trying to catch up and allow for the interoperability across these verticals. So we all got some kind of IoT device on us right now. Our phone basically is an IoT device. It's a sensor platform that's connected. But it doesn't necessarily connect to a lot of the other smart devices. So how can we both interconnect to allow for a lot of the advances in the data harnessing and the big data analytics that can come from this, that's going to be the next standards piece as we go forward.
So on mobile security and talking about mobile devices, there has been a lot of interest in this. The FTC and FCC have some inquiries going on. DHS just did a big RFI on mobile security. Vince or Nikki, can you talk a little bit about what concerns you or your agencies about mobile security and where folks should be focusing their attention? Because, again, that's a topic that has a lot of parts to it, and it's really complicated. It's not just like a lawnmower that works or it doesn't.
Sure. So I think this kind of relates also to the last question you asked, which was about mobile device security. So what Megan is referring to is in May of this year, the FCC as well as the FTC launched an investigation into mobile device security and vulnerabilities, and we sent letters to providers asking questions about how are they addressing mobile device security issues, how are they patching that, how are they getting that out to the device. And then the FTC also sent out a series of inquiries to manufacturers. And together we are looking at this, as Matt was just saying, this is so important given the explosion of different types of devices, the different kinds of information that is going to be on your device, and how important and how much we rely on them. So we are looking at that now. And then also with respect to 5G, and this is something the chairman brought up earlier today in his keynote, was the importance of baking in cyber security from the beginning, from the design with 5G, and we have that opportunity now. And that referred to all the standards work that's going on right now with 5G, and we are asking that be a dialogue that happens now, and our recent 5G report and order, in fact, will have a requirement that licensees provide a statement about what they're doing with respect to cyber. It's high level. It talks about what are you doing, whether it's employing like a NIST type of framework or what other kind of risk management practices are you incorporating. And one of the elements of that 5G item as well is that it did direct the Wireless Bureau, my bureau, the Public Safety Bureau, and the Office of Engineering and Technology to issue a notice of inquiry, which is basically a sort of high-level inquiry that would come out later this year asking about cybersecurity with respect to 5G. It's not intended to supplant other efforts that are already going on, but it is intended to foster a dialogue. There's so many other ways that we're looking at that too. I could go on, but those are some of the ways that we're looking at security in devices and security with 5G in particular.
Great. So for DHS, if you are aware or not, we actually, our secretary is required to do a study on mobile device security in consultation with NIST. So you may have seen the request for information out for mobile threats and defenses, literally asking industry and the research community about, what are the threats and defenses that you see out there? Specifically, you have a column for threats, and what is the defense that you have and what capabilities? Because we're looking at not what's wrong necessarily, but what defenses are out there, how are they used, what implications does that play into? Is it a full solution versus a partial mitigation type piece? And so all of that actually is to support the congressional study on mobile device security. So we've received to date about 147 submissions for the RFI. We've done a little over 10 one-on-one meetings with all the big telcos, the OS platform manufacturers, the chipset manufacturers, hopefully with others too. But that report is due December 16th to Congress, and they will use it in such a fashion. But I will note that some areas of concern for us that we see, and it's sort of resounding across the responses so far, and our teams are still working on it, so I'll caveat that a little bit, is that the piece of mobile malware, right? Mobile malware, whether it's ransomware or something like Pegasus in the news that you see today, other pieces that include where mobile application software actually has vulnerabilities and threats built into them. Maybe unknowingly from the app developer who maybe uses a third-party library, and that becomes vulnerable over time. Everything from disclosure of that. So when we do have something bad in there, well, are we going to put out a CVE or for that, Kim Kardashian app? Probably not. But again, how do we do this disclosure piece if one aspect of the mobile element is actually vulnerable, and it impacts 90,000 mobile apps across the ecosystem. That's some of the problems. Other things that we saw, which was interesting to see, where this actually comes down to the mobile network infrastructure. When you look at confidentiality and integrity of that, things like SS7 popped up. But I will note that, talking to folks, interoperability and how that all works together is quite great. However, your privacy, the integrity on the network itself, those were things that came into question. And most people like the things that they can control. So if you talk to an OS platform for mobile, they'll tell you we're great. We trust the things that we can control and we implement that. Everything else, well, they have to verify and check. When it comes to others that are chipset manufacturers, they trust the things that they can control. So it was very difficult, and you'll get to see the report December 16th for sure. There is a mobile threat catalog from NIST. Don't want to steal their thunder, but we work together on that. It's a NCCOE or NIST product, which includes over 300 to 350 mobile threat types. And we've looked through that list. There's no way we're going to go to Congress in the Hill with 300 threats. So just giving you a heads up. So we'll be paring that down, and we've identified the ecosystem. We've looked at, well, what are the major aspects? And we also have the ability, looking at legal authorities, different parts of NPPD are helping us with that, to see, well, does DHS even have legal authorities in mobile to do that? I mean, we don't own and operate the carrier network. But the idea is, well, what is it that we're looking for? Or what's the plan of action? How can we accelerate the adoption of secure mobile technology? Right? Whether it's through research, whether it's through other aspects of public-private partnership even. But that's something that we're looking to do and are actively pursuing that.
Thanks. I have a follow-up that might relate to some comments, Matt, you were making beforehand about vulnerabilities. But this discussion both from Nikki about getting information and certifications from operators about what they're doing in 5G, all the way to vulnerability disclosures, raised the question that, folks in industry are regularly concerned about, which is how do you calibrate the information that you make public, and what do you give to a regulator, and is it sensible to make a catalog of all the threats and responses? Because this isn't just competitively sensitive information, it also has a public safety impact that there's a balance to be struck. I hope you guys can maybe talk about how you approach that as a regulator or a government agency, saying, we found this, we're aware of a vulnerability. Do we want the bad guys to know where all the soft points are, or the extent of our mitigation capabilities? Matt, you had talked about vulnerability disclosures. Generally, you can answer this, or anyone who has thoughts, but I think it affects all the work you all do, because constantly, whether you're putting a report or you're taking information from the private sector, how are you balancing that need for the public to be aware versus not giving a roadmap to the bad guys or showing where the vulnerabilities might be?
So, let me start by saying this is NIST perspective. If we have a belief that we know and no one else does, that's generally a bad plan. If we have discovered, if someone else has discovered, if someone has knowledge of a vulnerability, it's probably a pretty good assumption that someone who would do something malicious with that vulnerability also either knows about it or will know about it relatively soon. So security by obscurity is generally not a good policy. That being said, we as both the government and industry and academia need to have better practices about standardizing and allowing for responsible vulnerability disclosures. There are both in government, in nonprofits, and in academia, vulnerability clearinghouses where people can report about either vulnerabilities they have as an industry. Microsoft is here, Microsoft does this. They have their own big block of CVEs, and they release them to vulnerability clearinghouses for public dissemination. Industry and academia can also report them either up through US CERT, or through Carnegie Mellon, or through MITRE, or through any of the other standardized clearinghouses. It's not clear how to do it. It's awkward. It's difficult. And, God help you if you want to actually tell somebody about a vulnerability you find, for example, in a government website. Good luck finding someone. So as the government, we need to do a better job allowing people to do the right thing in reporting vulnerabilities either to us or to industry or through an appropriate clearinghouse. So it can be done, it is done by industry, but we really should do a better job in standardize and communicating about it.
John?
So just like to add some of our experiences to that. I've been in the office on a Saturday, and you'd be surprised at the number of people that will call the U.S. CERT desk. Hey, someone just hijacked my computer. Should I pay them? Okay? And no, we don't know want to know where you went and how you got that. And in general, we get the whole gambit of that individual to the researchers calling into the NCIC and saying, I've discovered something. Can you help me work this through? Basically, at that point, we've have a pretty good track record, and there's, as mentioned, some nonprofits and educational institutions, CERT-CC up in Pittsburgh, and NCI, JTF, also out of Pittsburgh, come to mind, that are good, that are working with white hat researchers, come knocking on the door, they'll come knocking on our door, and they say, I've discovered this, can you help me contact the right person at the entity or the vendor? And the first step with us is to do the outreach, and because we've been doing this a couple years, we've slugged through the cold calls, and we've got a pretty good black book at this point in time. It's not where it needs to be, but it's pretty decent. And we go and we approach the vendor and we go, can we get some validation on this? And we try and do it in a, if you will, in a quick fashion, but also keep the discovery to a minimum. Then we act as a broker, if you will, between that researcher and the vendor to try and set up a schedule as to how long do you think it's going to be fixed? Can you tweak that, push that a little bit forward? Quite often you're going to see the announcement of a vulnerability come out with a patch. It's no coincidence that happens. It's working in the background with a lot of entities to make that occur. Also want to make sure that that researcher, he gets attributions for his discovery. So we've had problems in the past where people have just announced a problem. You've heard about the Muddy Waters. You've heard about St. Jude Medical Devices. You know, we'd like it to happen in a little bit more organized fashion in the background so that people have a chance to take proper action and protect it so that it's not out there and it becomes this big target that the bad guys want to exploit for other purposes. So our organization, and there's a number of other organizations, have been there in that broker clearinghouse mechanism, trying to help those that find a problem connect to those that can actually solve the problem and work it across the board.
Just for those of you who didn't see the news about the Muddy Waters St. Jude outfit was shorting St. Jude stock pending the release of a vulnerability that was done for the purpose of manipulating the stock price. And you know, from my discussions with folks, this was in industry, this is extraordinarily disconcerting to people for obvious reasons, but we'll see if the SEC takes action, because that, you know, it's a novel way to screw around with the equities markets. But these questions about vulnerability disclosures are difficult, and the security research community is you know, diverse in its motives. And I don't know if maybe Glenn, can you talk a little bit about some of the vulnerability disclosure work that NTIA has been looking at?
Yeah. So one of the things that you know, I think is important, and the way we try to look at some of these things, both as a Department of Commerce perspective and working with the other agencies, is, you know, are there ways to, you know, create the right incentives for people basically to do the right things, you know, if you can set up the right incentives to inform disclosures, inform consumers what their choices are. A lot of that, hopefully, you can start taking care of this. You started to talk about some of the issues, for example, in Internet of Things. I mean, Internet of Things, you know, is cyber on steroids, right? It's also privacy on steroids, because all of a sudden we're interacting with all these things around the room, many of which we're not even aware of that we're interacting with them. You know, I was thinking as we walked in through the door here and we all had to show our little badges and it's getting scanned in, well, you know, now everybody kind of could figure out exactly where we are right now. So one of the things we've tried to be, we've started in NTIA is a multi-stakeholder focused on sort of some of the unique aspects of Internet of Things. And in particular, our most recent focus has been on trying to create at least the right language and define some of the conversations around upgrading security vulnerabilities with regard to Internet of Things sensors. I mean, one of the issues within the world of Internet of Things, particularly is wearables and smaller issues, is that there's every incentive to make the sensors cheaper and smaller, with less power requirements, less computing power. But at the same time, what that does is it makes it sometimes, certainly more difficult and many times impossible to upgrade those sensors if there is a vulnerability detected later on in the lifespan of the device. So one of the things we're trying to do at least is to develop a common language, that will help us all have a conversation so consumers can be aware of the trade-offs they're making, perhaps between price versus security. And at least then we can start maybe having the market draw distinctions where certainly there may be some uses for Internet of Things devices where upgradability is not worth the cost. Things that are largely disposable, things that have short useful lives. But there are others that, particularly that are directly connected into the internet and are potential pathways for accessing other vulnerabilities and creating broader vulnerabilities, that we really think there is a need to make sure that folks are making the right choices and creating the right incentives for the manufacturers to implement security from the outset.
So Vince and Matt, I feel like your offices have done a pretty good job of getting private sector collaboration. I think companies feel pretty comfortable coming and sharing with you. Can you share a few of the reasons why you think that is? Is it particular constructs you have or a particular institutional approach, or is it the lack of regulatory authority? What makes people willing to come and share with you their confidential proprietary information?
Yes. But let me caveat that. They're not necessarily sharing their confidential proprietary information. Whenever you get to that level, that we get the lawyers in and we're signing NDAs, but it's more about, as you said, non-regulatory, so there's no concern about retribution or attribution for what is discussed or revealed. It's about being technology focused rather than policy. So it's around really focusing and looking for technology solutions to common answers. It's about being small, therefore not having the muscle or the ability to push them around or have the perception should that happen. And then also openness, transparency, and traceability. So they know how the discussion is going to be used, in what manner, and what the end products will be of those discussions. Those are some of the key ingredients that allow at least NIST to work externally. And again, being small, we have to leverage academia and international in order to put out and develop some of the products that we do, just so we can bring in some of the smartest people around the world.
Yeah, so for DHS S&T, I'd say, I'm not saying that they give us all their corporate confidential information, but in particular, they're definitely happy to work with us. Unlike other folks, regulatory or non-regulatory, we don't go with a stick, we go with a carrot. And so that approach does work because we try to solve real world problems, and we bring, whether it's customers with us from the department or from other international folks that we deal with. We have 13 bilateral agreements with different nations for DHS S&T, 8 or 9 of which now for cyber in general. So we bring real problems across the spectrum, whether it's just for an enterprise office or for the larger market. And so when we challenge the industry or the research community or both, we say, well, here's the upper and lower boundary of what we're trying to research. This is the problem area, the technical topic. Please respond with your white papers and proposals. And we look to fund that. We look to fund, line up, and help the technology development along, vendor agnostic for the most part. And, we're not looking to create rules or regulation around them. We're looking to sometimes even apply solutions and meet regulations, like whether it's a NIAP protection profile or something like that. We work with different parts of government and international to say, well, this is an innovation that's needed, so we'll fund it, and then we help it transition, hopefully cross the valley of death, if you're familiar with that at all, on the innovation side. And sometimes we make it, sometimes we don't. Unlike other operational parts of government, you know, we can afford to fail. I mean, if we're not actually taking enough risk in R&D. So.
And do you think you guys get enough input from the various sectors, or are there aspects of the private sector that you would like to hear more from?
Yeah, so historically, being in the information technology lab, we hear mostly from the information technology sector. Doing the cybersecurity framework on critical infrastructure really opened up a lot of other sectors we had not been communicating with. Water, transportation, chemical, and some of the, the classical non-critical infrastructure sectors, the retail sector, the National Restaurants Association, the other NRA, as they like to call themselves. These types of organizations that are really critical to the nation's economy, which is important to us as the Department of Commerce, but not necessarily a traditional industry that we've engaged with, or one that has necessarily been looked at with as much intensity as the classic critical infrastructure sectors. But sectors that are, if you look at Home Depot and Target and Sony, sectors that are very concerned about their cybersecurity postures, the threats that they face, and what it means to them as a business.
Did you want to comment? Okay.
Yeah, I mean, so on our side, it's definitely we want to hear from the sectors. Definitely, we don't think that we know it all or have all the threat intel. The actually best mobile threat intel actually comes from industry, not government, especially if you have whatever application on every device around the world in collecting that kind of feed. So definitely we try to build and manage those relationships. It's a little harder because it's based on fiscal programs, and they come and go and come and go, and so that's a little harder. But I will tell you, we've been building more and more on the mobile side a coalition of whether it's government and industry. I mean, it's a small niche within the DC, Virginia, Maryland area, one. Not to say that that's the only one, but that's definitely one area. And we've, even take information on the high side and the intel side in the IC community just to see, well, what are the sources and methods, and how can we defend against it if it's something, happening at a nation state level. We're still looking to protect and provide protections for the mobile infrastructure and the mobile device users around the world. So.
Just one sort of subheading on that is, I think we do a pretty good job of getting some wide participation from the folks who are affected, although I think there are obviously a lot of sectors that simply haven't really engaged on this. But I think what more importantly is making sure and working hard to try to make sure that we have the right people from each of these companies and sectors in the room. Being in DC, sometimes there's an inclination for folks to send their lawyers and lobbyists and folks, when really we need to look.
That's not so terrible, Glenn. Come on.
Well, you guys can subcontract. You guys got network guys there, but we really need the network guys. You really need to make sure that you're talking to the network guys and not in firsthand, not secondhand. And that's one of the things we sometimes struggle with, is making sure you get the right representatives in the room.
Yeah, and I think as Glenn was saying, it's important to get out of the beltway. We will often then go to where those constituents are around the country and get that feedback from where they are at their events. It's very easy for cybersecurity people to go to a cybersecurity event and talk about cybersecurity. We all agree. But when you go to where they are and get their business perspectives, that's when things get into better balance.
In fact, I'll mention that as our first multi-stakeholder on the upgradability for Internet of Things we're going to have next month somewhere outside of the DC area for that very reason.
Nikki, from the FCC's perspective, you obviously have a group of companies that are repeat players at the FCC. They participate in NOIs and rulemakings and all of that. How does the FCC get additional input? Are you working with other federal agencies to try and broaden the perspectives, or do you feel like you are getting what you need from the broader ecosystem, because it is such a big and diverse ecosystem, and you only have sort of direct regulatory authority over a piece of it? So how is that affecting what you guys are doing?
Sure. As everyone has emphasized, everything is interconnected, and cybersecurity crosses different industries, different sectors, so it's not just about telecom. In this regard, I think that we are trying as best as we can to reach out through participation in conferences, through having monthly calls with state and local tribal organizations, but also through our sister agencies. For example, there is the Independent Cyber Regulators Forum that the chairman is actually going to be taking over the chair of later this month. And that includes regulatory agencies like FERC or the FCC, and we work with them to talk about what kinds of threats that we're seeing or what can we do about it and deconflict our approaches. So I think that there's so many different ways that we need to reach out. And one of the things I would also emphasize is the importance of small and medium-sized businesses and not looking at it solely through the lens of, say, nationwide providers, but also maybe the smaller companies that don't have the same resources to leverage, and making sure that we are helping those folks in terms of implementing risk management or being aware of what they can do in terms of best common practices to address some of these risks. So I think that's been a focus and is very important to us.
About information sharing, government's a greedy beast. We put out a lot of RFIs. I have a lot of gimme type things that we ask. But the partnership that I have with industry, and we've grown, I don't know, about 7% in our membership or industry partnership over the past 7 years, which is pretty good numbers. I wish I had stock in that because that would be pretty good. But the recruitment actually has come from industry. They said the partnership works. There's value sets in sharing information. And it's not just DHS sitting at the table, but NTIA is there, FCC's there, sans their regulator hat. And we've got a forum where we can trust one another, and AT&T and Sprint and T-Mobile and Verizon buy one another a cup of coffee, and they talk about what's happening in their networks. And they give us a little insight as to what works and what doesn't work. We've been fortunate that we've had even the dysfunction that they might have in Washington at times. Congress has come through with the Cybersecurity Information Sharing Act. So it's added a little bit of clarity as where's a starting point to share, provided a little bit more clarity on how the information is going to be protected and used depending on how it's submitted. So those little steps and the history of having a good partnership has paid a lot of dividends along the way. I think folks in the audience will know that FCC as a regulator has the network's outage reporting system. So report. And as I understand, you're not fined for what you report, you're fined if you don't report. So that's one thing. But in collaboration with industry, and they led a good portion of this, and ourselves and FCC, we put together a disaster information reporting system. It's voluntary. So we work with industry to assess the situation, and primarily these are physical events, once again, hurricanes, earthquakes, and other things where there's going to be large outages. And the government is going to be in its greedy mode, but they're also trying to execute its emergency response capabilities. We've evacuated people. What's the infrastructure going to be like so we can repopulate the area? Industry knows. We don't know. So we come to the table, we ask questions. That information reporting that we've put together has a pretty good standard on it, so we can trend out what's happening in a situation, and we can actually give a pretty good snapshot throughout the day as to what's happening in the environment. So those first responders on the ground have some clarity as to how to respond. And I think that's a pretty good symbol of the partnership that we have across the board. There's a lot of information sharing that happens that's just not readily apparent. CISRIC is going to come out has an information sharing working group that I'm associated with and is going to be publishing some of those findings. So cybersecurity doesn't happen in a bubble. We understand that, and I think there's a lot of information and sharing in the background that keeps the networks reliable, keeps them running, and keeps us, at times a little bit oblivious to everything that it takes to run. We're just grateful that it happens.
Great. I could keep asking questions all day because I find this fascinating, but I want to give you guys a chance to ask. We can keep chatting, but do folks from the audience have any questions for any of the folks on the panel about what their agencies are doing or what they're seeing in terms of, there is so much activity going on. Yes, sir.
I'll bring the mic to you. Absolutely.
I don't want to mischaracterize what I heard, but it seemed like the overall emphasis of what you guys have been talking about is largely reacting to problems rather than building things into the devices and the infrastructure that provide barriers of protection. I just wonder what activities, perhaps in the research community, are underway to put out devices and operating systems that use practices that I think are fairly well known in the technology community, codes, signing, and sandboxes, and virtual device. What's happening from your perspective that's perhaps driving that or being involved in that protection rather than just reaction?
So that's a good question. So to some extent, there's an industry built around reacting, and we need, as government, as industry, as a nation, to maybe shift that discussion and start taking a look at and asking more about the base OEM products we get and their capabilities and what they're doing to do things like implement security design practices, SDL efforts. If you look at work that's being done from the chipset on up, this is starting to shift and work. Intel, Microsoft are examples of recent products that now are looking to put security into the product from design. What we need to do as an industry and as a nation is to ensure that that market shift is incentivized, and us as a government need to ensure we incentivize it as well. If we don't continue to ask and procure product that demonstrates secure by design capabilities, then we are not doing well by the market who is investing in it. So it's a two-edged side. Now that being said, there's a lot of great work in the IEEE, in ISO, and in international standards on secure development practices, as well as transparency for products to express those practices. And there's a lot of research in the future mechanisms for that around things like secure BIOS, secure bootstrapping up through the OSs, secure hardware, supply chain security, security down to bare metal issues and then back up again. So there's the whole spectrum. Industry is starting to respond to those concerns, especially from the consumer side. We need to then also respond to industry back out as that as well.
One thing just to add on that, being that this is an all-government panel, I'll just pipe up for the private sector a bit. One thing Matt said that really resonated was the consumer side of things. If the consumer is driving things, that to me is maybe a more comfortable paradigm than the government demanding it, because procurement's a pretty narrow slice of the overall device market, but there is a constant effort by the industry and government to educate consumers about even sort of what I would consider low-tech security steps that are often not taken. So I think that's, I don't know if that's come up in a lot of what you guys are doing. CTIA constantly is saying that in
But a lot of that is still reactive, which is going back to what he was saying. A lot of those education and awareness programs around patching and updating and which is a different concept, which is important, but a different concept than asking for products that are inherently secure in their delivery, which we don't necessarily have now, but something that we should aspire to and work to in the future.
And I think consumers also have add-ons and over-the-top applications and lots of things that they're doing, but the survey work that CTIA does, I think this is an evolving discussion with the public about what they should be looking for and demanding, because a lot of consumers security is not top of mind when they're buying the next fastest device or they want to upgrade. And whether it should be is a kind of a different question, but it's a critical piece of this that I think can get overlooked by looking at hardware as a solution by itself. But
So from DHS S&T perspective, there's other aspects of like software-based roots of trust or hardware-based roots of trust, looking at the integrity of the device. Those things could be more, I guess, proactive to a certain extent. Other aspects that we do even fund research in, a new one coming up, is actually building in security for the app lifecycle management of a mobile app. So when you look at a mobile backend as a service solution or a mobile app development platform that you would develop a mobile app on, you look at, well, are these just modules that I put in? Are these components that I reuse and, I build a widget or a connector from one mobile app to now a backend database, and I just replicate this all over every mobile app? It's efficiency, right? It's great. Well, what happens when that becomes vulnerable? How do we deal with all of those? So building in security into the app lifecycle management for mobile backend as a service or other development platforms is what we're looking to do. I mean, it's partly applied research and development in that regard, but you see it. Everybody says, well, we don't want that bolt-on security at the end. We want it built in from the ground up. And from a government perspective, we have in the public space anywhere between 300 to 500 mobile apps that are publicly available. And so you'll see that we want those mobile apps built and also to be secure, right? Not coming with, libraries with known vulnerabilities, or not having hard-coded passwords, or not doing certificate pinning incorrectly. There's different parts of, development of something as simple as a mobile app, and anybody can be a mobile app developer. Not everybody can be a software app developer. You need training for that usually, right? In a mobile app, we just reuse components. So you'll find that there's different ways to be proactive, one of which we're looking to do, but that's very a small sliver of the pie.
Just a real quick, I want to reemphasize your point of that there clearly is a role for educating consumers here. And because the market parts of this won't work, you won't be able to drive demand unless consumers understand what their choices are. So there's clearly an educational aspect, and I think an important role for government as far as educating consumers, helping them understand what their choices are.
Any other questions from the audience?
We have one here.
Great panel. Megan, great job. It's not I don't get to chance it very often, so I
I'll
want
pay
to
you
kind
afterwards.
well, you do a good job because you know what you're talking about. I'm just saying that. So here's my question as it applies to cyber hackers and social and reverse engineering. Has yet been brought up in discussion. I spent a lot of time at Black Hat and DEF CON, and every time I hear about cyber, I'm not hearing enough about reverse and social engineering and the hacker's mindset, who don't care about technology and cybersecurity. They know how to get around it in the human capital factor, and they've beat it 10, 20, 30, 100 times over. So I'd like to hear the panel's response to that, because it's a real issue. And it was the favorite this year at DEF CON. Social hacking, reverse and social engineering. So all this is great, and I think it's very important. You guys are smart, and you know what you're talking about. But I got to hear what your thoughts and opinions are in that area that doesn't seem to be getting enough issues in address as it applies to cyber.
It kind of comes back to this gentleman's question over here, which is how we design both our products and the cybersecurity solutions that we provide on those products. I'm an engineer, so I will apologize to you up front. Because we're the people who brought you, error 404 and this certificate is invalid. Do you want to go to that website? Well, of course you want to go to that website. That's where you're going. So we, as a cybersecurity engineering community, have failed to include the user as part of our requirements process in designing solutions. Usability of cybersecurity technologies is now gaining the emphasis that it needs so that products can be designed that are easy to secure out of the box. They are hard to do the wrong thing. And when you do the wrong thing, it's easy to back up. Instead, we've built them completely opposite, where it's complicated and difficult to secure them. It's easy to do the wrong thing and be socially engineered. And once you do, it's incredibly difficult to recover from that. So that's part of this design factor, and ensuring that we learn from the other engineering disciplines that include the user as part of the requirements analysis process, which we have not done effectively in the past.
From the NCIC perspective, I'll add on to, while we're operations, to your question, education is one of the pieces that we look at for trying to inform the users. We do have teams that can go to other departments and agencies and scan their networks. Invariably, one of the favored ways to try and penetrate that network after we get all the P's and Q's signed off and on not responsibilities is spear phishing. And that's directly targeted at some of the users. After they go through that environment and we get in and we start to achieve the privileges, and then they go and they scan the network to understand it, they go back to that baseline of, okay, we got in this way. So you've got to go back to your user base, reemphasize some of those things about being socially engineered, being cognizant about what you're clicking on and how you're proceeding. So we do try and target the users as a entry point, exploit them tiny little bit just to make a point when you've got a kind of a white knight, if you will, checking your network. So we do try and tie that in, but there's still an education piece across the board. We do have control systems folks. They run week-long sessions, red teams, white teams across the board, and bring in lots of folks from industry and government to play those games so they understand where they fit in the picture, not just the technology, but how they can also be exploited by phone calls and things of that nature.
Any other questions? We have about a minute and a half left, and then I was going to ask the panelists in closing to identify one thing that you're optimistic about as you look forward to the next, say, 18 months of cybersecurity. What is promising, or what do you think will be a good development from your agencies or in technology or elsewhere?
You want to give me 18 months?
Okay, you can set the time frame as you like, Matt. 5 years.
Good. 5 years I can do. We're looking at new compute fabrics. We're hitting Moore's law. We're running out of gate size. We're looking at MEM computing, and this crazy quantum computing thing is starting to come online. We're building error correction, quantum gates and combs, and what that's going to do is all your public key infrastructure don't work no more. So we're starting the next generation of encryption technologies to replace our public key infrastructures. We need to do this now, because if we wait until quantum computers come, then it's too late. Everything's failed. So this is going to be an exciting time in the next 5 years as we develop these new suites of algorithms for replacing public key infrastructures and asynchronous encryption. It's going to be really geeky and fun, and we're excited about that.
My one statement would be that I'm optimistic that this issue has made it to the point where there is widespread acknowledgement that it is a critical issue, and that it's, we're going to have a change of administration in 4.5 months or whatever the case may be, and I don't think that it's going to result in any less focus on this issue, because there's plenty of acknowledgement that we got to keep an eye on this, and it's all the agencies who are talking together and working on this in a whole bunch of different ways.
I think we'd like to see the framework that was put together by CISA advent itself in actual information sharing. We've created automated indicator sharing. We've got a framework in place. Currently, we've got 8 federal entities, 130 non-feds, and of those 130 non-feds, those have signed letters of intent. 40 of them actually fully serviced and ready to click into the server, so that when something happens, we can share information back and forth. The information sharing at this point, we've got one entity that's actually from the non-fed side that's providing data. So a good portion of this is coming from the government piece, but we'd like to see that sharing happen and take advantage of the frameworks that have been put in place. So that's our go-to, and I would put that in a 1-year time frame versus a 5-year time frame. Let's take advantage of what's in place.
Sure. So on our side, new innovation is probably what the simple, easy answer is. I'll say that, just for this conference, I would say when you look at 5G and network slices, what's the security protocol going from one slice to another, and how that's going to be implemented? That's definitely an area that I'd see new innovation coming, and look forward to see how that actually plays out. Because if they don't figure it out, then it'll be regulated, and then good luck. We'll have lots of fun there. So just as an idea, if I was going to do for mobile. Yeah.
Great. Last but not least.
So I think that there are so many balls that are in motion right now with the FCC, and there are a lot of efforts underway. I would emphasize the 5G proceeding, which, as the chairman referenced earlier today in his keynote, is proceeding at lightning speed. So I would say that that's something, the innovation, the 5G, something that we can look forward to. But I also wanted to touch on a few other things that maybe aren't always at the top of mind, but John alluded to them a couple times, which is our nation's emergency alert system. We have an open proceeding right now on securing the emergency alert system that I think is vital, and that I think we can look forward to seeing some improvements there. And another thing is public safety, answering points, our nation's 911 call centers, looking at how we can improve cybersecurity in that arena. We have a task force on it's an acronym, Task Force on Optimal PSAP Architecture. Basically, we're looking at how do we equip our nation's call centers for the next generation 911. So that's another area. And then one more, which is cyber workforce. We're working closely with NICE, with NIST, on making sure that we have folks in the pipeline learning about, ready to assist in cyber as we move forward. And these talented professionals, individuals for the future, we need them, and we are working hard to make sure that we have them as a resource. So those are just a few of the other things I wanted to point out that we're working on.
Great. Well, thank you all very much. I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference. And thanks again to my speakers and to CTIA for hosting us. Thanks so much.